The sun burned low across the Arizona sky, throwing long golden fingers through the cottonwoods as John Marston rode along the dry riverbed. Dust rose behind his horse like ghosts trailing the living. He wasn't riding toward anything that day, only away from the memories that still followed him like a curse. The war had left him hollow, and the years that came after didn't fill that emptiness. The valley, quiet and endless, seemed the only place big enough to bury his past. He built himself a cabin where the river curved like a snake between the hills, a lonely patch of land that smelled of cedar and smoke. It was a place to forget, or maybe to start again, though he didn't know which one he wanted more. It was near dusk when he first saw her. A faint cry, thin and sharp, cut through the rustle of the trees. He followed it, thinking it might be a wounded animal, but what he found stopped his breath. A girl, barely grown, her leg caught in a cruel steel trap, blood painting the sand beneath her. Her skin was dusted with red earth, her hair tangled, her eyes burning with defiance even as pain racked her body. When he stepped closer, she reached for the knife at her belt, voice trembling but fierce. "Don't touch me." He held up both hands, showing he meant no harm. "Easy now. That thing's biting through your leg. I just want to help." She tried to shift, winced, then pressed her lips together until her face went pale. Her strength was leaving fast, but her pride stayed. "Go," she said weakly. "My people will find me. If they don't, the wolves will," he answered. There was no anger in his tone, only quiet certainty. He crouched beside her, his shadow falling over the trap. "Hold still." She watched him like one might watch a snake, ready to strike, but she didn't stop him as he pried open the rusted jaws and pulled her free. Her leg was mangled, blood slick and bright. He tore a strip from his own shirt and bound it tight around her thigh, his hands steady even as she trembled. When he lifted her, she tried to resist, pushing at his chest, but her strength was gone. By the time they reached his horse, her head rested weakly against his shoulder, breath shallow, her knife forgotten in the dirt. The ride back was silent. She didn't ask where he was taking her, and he didn't ask her name. The sky darkened to violet, the desert wind cooling the sweat on their faces. By the time he carried her inside his cabin, she had fallen asleep, or passed out, from pain and blood loss. He laid her on his cot, cleaned the wound as best he could, and stayed awake through the night to keep the fire going. When dawn came, she was still alive. He found her awake, eyes open, staring at him like he was both her savior and her captor. "Why didn't you leave me?" she whispered. He poured her water, kept his voice low. Didn't seem right. For days she said little, eating only when he wasn't looking. He noticed how she studied every corner of the cabin, memorizing ways out. He didn't chain her or stop her from leaving. He only tended her wound, spoke when spoken to, and went about his chores as though she wasn't there. Bit by bit, her silence softened. On the fifth night, she asked, "Why do you live alone?" John sat by the hearth, the glow of the fire painting lines on his face. "Because of done things better left forgotten." She didn't answer, but the way she looked at him said she understood something about ghosts. He learned her name on the 8th day. She said it quietly, almost to herself. "Iona." He repeated it, careful not to mispronounce. She watched him with wary eyes, as if hearing her name in his mouth carried danger. When her strength returned, she tried to stand, stumbled, and he caught her before she fell. She pulled away instantly, cheeks flushed. "My people will think you took me," she said. "If I return alone, they'll ask questions." He stared into the fire for a long time before replying. "Then I'll take you back myself." Her eyes widened. "They will kill you." He gave a small, tired smile. "Wouldn't be the first to try." 2 mornings later, he saddled his horse, wrapped her wound again, and set off toward the canyons. The ride was long and quiet. She didn't speak much, only pointed the way when he asked. When they reached the valley near the Apache camp, the wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of drums. Then shadows appeared on the ridge, riders, armed and painted, closing in. They surrounded them fast, bows drawn. One dismounted, grabbed John by the arm, and pulled him from the horse. "White man," the warrior said, "you bring her back, or you steal her again." Iona's voice broke through the tension. "He saved me. The trap in the canyon, I would be dead." The warriors exchanged glances, uncertain. Finally, one motioned to her. "Come, you belong with your people." Before leaving, she looked at John one last time. Her eyes said everything words couldn't, "Thank you," and something deeper that scared them both. He rode home alone that night, the moon cold and empty above the trees. For days, he tried to forget her. But each night he saw her face in the firelight, heard her voice in the whisper of the river. Then, one full moon later, there was a knock at his door. He opened it, and there she was. Barefoot, hair loose, eyes bright with tears. "They think I'm gathering herbs," she said. "I told them I needed the river." He didn't ask why she came. He only stepped aside. That night, they talked until dawn. She told him about her people, the songs, the stars, the old ways that bound them to the land. He told her about the war, about the noise that never left his head. She listened with quiet sadness. When she rose to leave, she hesitated. "If I come back," she asked softly, "will you send me away?" He shook his head. No. And she did come back. Again, and again, each visit longer than the last, until one morning she didn't leave at all. They built a life out of silence and small kindnesses. He showed her how to mend fences, she taught him how to listen to the wind. When the rains came, they planted corn by the river. When winter fell, she embroidered deer hides by the fire. Love grew between them like roots, slow, hidden, impossible to pull apart. But the valley was never far from the eyes of others. One afternoon, soldiers rode through while John was mending the roof. They saw the smoke, the woman at the window, and rode up laughing. The captain dismounted, boots crunching on the gravel. "Marston," he said, "you got yourself a pretty savage in there." John's jaw tightened. "That's my wife." The captain sneered. "Ain't no law recognizes that." He spat on the ground, then rode off with his men, laughter trailing behind them. Iona came to him, her hands trembling. "They will bring trouble," she whispered. He touched her cheek. "Let them try." That night, the wind carried a strange silence, heavy and watchful. John loaded his rifle and kept it near the door. He sat awake long after she'd fallen asleep, staring into the fire, wondering if love was ever enough to keep the world from tearing you apart. At dawn, the dogs began barking. Then came the sound of hooves, and the world he'd built began to burn. The morning air was cold, the kind that bites the lungs before the sun has time to soften it. John Marston woke to the sting of blood drying on his face, the rough pull of rope biting into his wrists. His arms were lashed tight behind a wooden pole, his knees pressed into the hard earth. Around him, the Apache camp stirred like a storm. About to break, men sharpening spears, women whispering, children watching with wide, solemn eyes. The smoke from their fires curled upward, carrying the scent of sage and burning pine. Somewhere behind him, horses snorted, uneasy. He could hear the low thrum of drums, slow, deliberate, like the heartbeat of the desert. His vision swam, but when it cleared, he saw her. Iona stood among them, her face pale beneath streaks of dust and tears. Her father, Chief Dakota, stood beside her, tall, unyielding, the weight of generations carved into his features. The chief's voice broke through the murmur of the crowd, deep and steady. "This man trespassed upon our land. He took what was not his. Our laws are older than his kind's memory. Blood calls for blood." John tried to speak, but his throat was dry. "I didn't take her," he rasped. "She came to me." The warriors shouted in anger, one stepping forward to strike him across the face. He fell sideways, dirt filling his mouth, the taste of iron on his tongue. But Iona cried out, running to him, pushing the warrior away. "He speaks truth," she shouted. "He saved me. He gave me life when the canyon tried to take it." Her father's expression didn't change. "He gave you life," Dakota said slowly, "and in return, you gave him shame. You turned your back on your blood." Iona trembled, her voice breaking. "No, father, I followed my heart." The chief turned to the crowd. "The heart is a foolish thing when it forgets the tribe. This man will die at sunset." The words rolled over John like thunder. He looked at her, at the way she stood there trembling yet proud, and knew what was coming. He'd seen death enough times to recognize its scent, to know when it had already claimed him. But there was no fear in him, only regret that she'd have to watch. The hours dragged, the sun climbed high, burning the camp in golden shadow. They gave him no food, no water. Iona stayed near, trying to speak with the elders, pleading in words that cracked her voice. Some pitied her, some turned away, but none dared defy the chief. When the sun began to fall, the camp gathered again. The drums started up, louder now, steady as a war march. The executioner, an older warrior with a painted chest and cold eyes, approached, spear in hand. Iona's heart pounded so hard it drowned out the drums. She ran to her father, fell to her knees, and grabbed his robe. "Please," she whispered. You taught me that honor lives in truth. The truth is that I love him. Dakota's face darkened. You do not understand love, he said. Love does not break what it touches. Love does not divide nations. Then what is it, she cried, if not love that makes me stand here and beg for his life? The chief turned away, signaling to the executioner. The spear rose. The crowd began to chant. John lifted his head. His voice was hoarse, but steady. Iona, he called, don't. She didn't let him finish. She broke free from the guards and ran, her feet kicking up dust. The executioner's spear came down, and she threw herself in front of it. The blade caught her shoulder, slicing through the fabric of her dress, drawing a crimson line down her arm. The chanting stopped. Her scream echoed across the camp, sharp and full of fury. Don't kill my husband. The world went still. Even the drums stopped. The chief's hand froze midair. Iona's breath came in shudders as she turned to face him, her wound bleeding freely. Yes, she said, her voice trembling but strong. My husband. We married before fire and spirit. Before your gods, before his. Our hearts made the promise. Dakota stared at her, his face unreadable. The crowd murmured, torn between shock and disbelief. The word husband hung in the air like thunder. You speak of union, Dakota said at last, but your kind's marriage means nothing to the spirits of this land. Iona met his gaze. Then let the spirits judge us. If our love is cursed, let it destroy us both. But if it is true, then no man has the right to take his life. The chief's jaw tightened. The silence stretched until it hurt to breathe. Finally, he lowered his hand. Untie him. The warriors hesitated, uncertain, but his voice hardened. Now, the ropes fell away. John collapsed forward, catching himself just before he hit the ground. His arms throbbed, blood rushing back to his hands. Iona dropped beside him, pressing her forehead to his. It's over, she whispered, though her tears said she wasn't sure it ever could be. Dakota turned his back to them. Go, he said quietly. Before I change my mind. They didn't wait. John helped her onto a horse, wrapped his arm around her to keep her steady, and rode hard into the night. The drums didn't start again. Only the sound of the desert wind followed them, cold, endless, carrying the scent of smoke and sorrow. They didn't speak for hours, not until they reached the ridge where the stars looked close enough to touch. John stopped the horse, helped her down, and stared out over the valley. The moon lit her face, pale and beautiful despite the blood still drying on her arm. You should have let them finish it, he said softly. You didn't have to do that. She turned to him, her eyes glistening. I did, because without you, I have no name left to live with. He touched her wound, careful not to hurt her. They'll hunt us, then we'll run, she said. The world is wide. They found shelter in the canyons for the night, built a small fire, and sat close beneath a blanket of silence. John stared at the flames, thinking about the home they'd lost, the tribe that would call her a traitor, the soldiers who would call him worse. Yet for the first time in years, the weight in his chest felt lighter. She rested her head on his shoulder, her hand finding his, and for a moment, the world beyond the fire didn't exist. Days turned into weeks. They traveled by moonlight, slept in caves, followed the rivers south where no one knew their names. She taught him to read the stars, he taught her to track the land. Slowly, the scars on her shoulder healed, though the pain between them never quite left. Once, while camped near a dry canyon, John said, we could find a town somewhere. Start again. Pretend we're just another couple trying to live. She smiled faintly. And when they ask where I'm from, when they see my skin. He didn't answer. He only looked down, ashamed of a world he hadn't built but couldn't change. That night, she dreamed of her father, his face caught between pride and grief, and woke with tears on her cheeks. He'll never forgive me, she whispered. John pulled her close. Then let time do what words can't. Seasons passed. They built another cabin near the foothills, smaller but safer. He hunted, she grew herbs, and together they lived in quiet defiance of everything the world said they couldn't be. Some nights they laughed, others they sat in silence, remembering what they'd lost. But they were together, and that was enough. Years later, travelers passing through the desert spoke of strange lights flickering by the river, of a man and woman moving like shadows among the rocks. Some said they were ghosts, the white rancher and the Apache girl who defied death. Others swore they'd seen smoke rising from a cabin no one could ever find. And when the wind swept through the valley at night, it carried her voice, soft and certain, whispering across the desert, don't kill my husband. The words no longer sounded like a plea. They sounded like a promise, one that the land itself remembered, long after the people who made it were gone.